welcome to Commander Central, episode 138. And today we'll be taking a look at Matthias M's Teshar Apostle of the Machine deck. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
And Chris had to head out to go to GP Indianapolis.
Which we should probably announce.
Yes. We will not be attending.
Dana and I will not be there.
We had planned on it. We had a place to stay. We were ready to go. And we both kind of had work things coming up at the last minute.
So we are unable to go.
We're unable to go. Chris will be there, and he just borrowed a couple of Max's decks.
Yes, so he'll be there Friday all day to play Commander probably. He'll be in his CMDR Central t-shirt. And then if his team, because it is Team Modern.
Yes.
If they end up not doing well or they scrub out on Sunday, track him down, and I'm sure he'll get a game of EDH in.
Absolutely. Either of those 2 days he'll be there to play. And we're really sorry we had wanted to go. We just kind of had real life stuff that cropped up and messed up our plans to go to Indy.
Yeah.
So apologies for anybody who was trying to be there to hang out with us. And we're going to miss the Brainstorm Brewery party too. That was another reason we were going, and that's unfortunate also. But life has just interjected here for this weekend. And I think this is the last GP of the year, really, that we were planning on going to that's nearby. So
yeah, that is 100% correct.
Next year we'll be making plenty, though. So if we missed you this weekend, we will absolutely try to find you next year. We're going to do a deck tech today, Max. But I think we have a little bit of contest news to talk about beforehand.
We do. So we have our contest from last month to announce the winners of. So for our Twitter contest, we were giving away that signed Great Defender by Mark Poole from Legends. Winner of that goes to James Gilbreth. He's at JNGILBREATH.
Okay.
So congratulations, James. Reach out to us and send us your address, and we'll get that in the mail for you. For Patreon, we were giving away that altered Lord Windgrace card done by a local friend of the show, Ben Johnston.
Yep.
Winner of that is Benjamin Thomas. I believe we met him at GP Minneapolis this year.
Yeah.
So, Benjamin, thank you so much for supporting us on Patreon, and I'll reach out to you, and I'll get that in the mail in the next week or so.
Excellent. And we have a couple other contests that have already kicked up and are starting here.
They have. They will be starting right now. On Twitter, we're giving away the 5 MTG wristbands that we got at GP Vegas. They're one for every Planeswalker from Core 19. So if you follow and retweet that tweet you see that we send, we'll be giving out one to up to 5 people. So
there we go.
We'll give away one of every color. And then for Patreon, we are giving away an Ultimate Guard Mountain playmat that Dana got in one of his collection's adventures. It is still sealed and in the box, so a brand new playmat for one of our lucky Patreon supporters.
Very cool. Well, speaking of Patreon supporters, we have a deck here, Patreon supporter Matthias M. And it is a Teshar Ancestor's Apostle deck, which was a new creature from Dominaria last year. And we got some notes here from Matthias. He says he plays mainly in his local shop, and they have a pretty diverse meta with anything from precons to 75% decks, and all tuned up to 10 power level. The goal of the deck is to assemble an engine that allows him to churn through his deck and combo out. The deck is inspired by known scumbag Matt Morgan.
Oh, from your other show.
From my other show. An article he wrote about transferring the KCI deck from Modern to EDH. And he took that idea and ran with it until it was as lean and mean as he could make it.
The deck is meant for playing in the top end of his meta, so blue combo decks, Gitrog combo decks, mono green Sovala decks, Urza Stacks decks, Yasan combo decks, Duretti Stacks. That just sounds like a meta full of hyper-tuned Commander decks.
Pretty close to CEDH level, if not CEDH level decks.
Lately, he's been focusing on adding some more interaction to the deck, but really nothing is off limits. Any card is up for debate, and if we wonder why the deck has fetches in it, it's mainly for the shuffle effects and so he can Scroll Rock, use Sensei's Divining Top, and Mystic Forge.
That all makes sense.
The biggest problem with the deck currently is with Graveyard Hate. From green, this is mainly Scavenger Ooze, which it can easily tutor for, and Artifact Graveyard Hate from blue for the same reason.
And in terms of budget, the cards in the deck can sort of speak for themselves. He's got a pretty good budget here, clearly. The only card that would be out of reach is Mishra's Workshop, so that's out of pretty much everyone's reach. That makes sense. Other than that, anything similar to cards in the deck can be discussed. And the main way he combos out and wins here is for Teshar to trigger to recur cards like Mirror Retriever, and then combo that with some kind of sack outlet and cards like Chromatic Star or Lotus Petal to just mill through the deck with Grinding Station and alter it until he hits a win con like Aetherflux Reservoir or Perilous Myrrh, can keep making a loop and make infinite mana to cast Walking Ballista. And he can substitute Teshar for like Enduring Renewal to get a loop going there as well.
Yep.
And you can also loop top with Mystic Forge or Foundry Inspector or Cloud Key if that's in play to cast it for 0 and draw the deck out. So this is a really lean and mean deck, like he said. Average CMC is 1.77. That's insane. But there are also 101 cards in the deck.
There is 101. It took me about 5 times to add up all the numbers at my office doing prep for this, and I'm like, okay, I'm not crazy. I get 101.
Yep. So we'll address that here as we go along. First thing I think we'll look at here is the land base.
Should we explain what Teshar does, since it is
Sure, yeah,
been a
you know
year?
what? That's a good idea. We should.
So Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle, is a legendary creature, bird cleric for 3 and a white. It is power and toughness 2/2. It has flying and it also says whenever you cast a historic spell, which is artifact and legendary, I believe.
Artifact, legendary, or saga.
Saga, yep, okay. Return target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Notice that says creature because I went through all my prep and didn't read that word and had to redo all my prep.
So yeah, Teshar, and we've seen a couple Teshar decks in the shop. They are much less efficient than this Teshar deck. It reminds me a lot when it plays of, what's the mono black, Shiri, Death's Caretaker.
Yep.
Where it's flipping a lot of little things in and out. This is kind of plays like a mono white version of that, too.
Yes.
So, land base, 32 lands. But for a deck with this low a CMC, that's not crazy necessarily.
So, I have something to say here.
Yes.
I did 20 random playtests on Architect with this deck.
Just like
because I'm like,
random
geez,
goldfish hands to see how it hits.
32 lands, you're never going to get an opening hand with enough to keep going.
Right.
I had to use my free mulligan twice out of those 20 times. So it has an 80% essentially hit rate of enough lands and stuff in your hand to get going, because we'll get to this later, but there's every fast mana rock in this deck that there can be.
Including, things that are crazy expensive like Lion's Eye Diamond, Mox Diamond, that kind of thing. It's not just the sort of expensive ones. It's basically everything.
The expensive ones, yes. So just from me, and yes, I know 20 is not enough to make an accurate study.
Right.
But it's what I could do in a short amount of time.
And that's, I think, it gives you a reasonable idea.
And that's no more than what I would do with a paper deck on my coffee table before I take it to EDH night. I'd goldfish it 20 to 25 times, be like, oh, cool. I guess this is keepable, and move on.
Yep. Okay, so the lands here, there's quite a few fetch lands, like you mentioned, that just gives them some shuffles for top, things like that, scroll rack. Ancient Tomb, obviously just a powerhouse soul land there. Blast Zone, good way to take care of some soul rings, things like that. If you need some removal on a land, doesn't suck up a slot either. Buried Ruin, one more way to recur some of these artifacts in the graveyard. City of Traders, just a powerhouse, both in terms of cost and in terms of effect. And I think this is one of those decks where the games aren't going to last long enough that
you worry about sacrificing it.
Cryptic Caves basically is just a way to turn a used up land into a draw when you get to the point in the game where you don't need it. Darksteel Citadel, procs things like the Mox Opals, Metalcraft that you need. It's indestructible too. Makes sense here. Inventor's Fair to open an artifact. Phyrexia's Core lets you sacrifice an artifact to gain a life. It's mostly just a sack outlet there. And Secluded Steppe that just has cycling baked in when you don't need the land. Strip Mine to deal with the problem. And the rest tend to be fetches and 17 snow-covered plains. So anything there that you want to talk about, Max?
It's a very low count.
It is.
But like I said, I did the test draws. This is a fast meta, so I think the way the deck is built, that 1.77 average CMC, I think this is a solid land base. typically we would probably say throw in a Scavenger Grounds and
Right.
throw in a Ghost Quarter, but the fact that your deck is essentially revolving around comboing out of your graveyard,
You probably don't want
you
that
don't
Scavenger
want those
Grounds.
in
Yeah.
your deck, which is really weird to say for us.
Yeah, but it makes sense here.
But no, I think it's fine. This deck isn't worried about making exuberant amount of mana right
Yes.
away, so there's no reason for like doublers or like a myriad landscape. You just want your lands coming in untapped every turn that you can play them.
There were a couple, and that's a good jump-off point to one of the ones I had a question for was Secluded Steppe, which is the land with cycling for a white. At ETB's tapped, you can tap it for a white, or you can cycle it for a single white to draw a card. Discard and draw a card. Steppe in those cycling lands makes sense usually if there's some added synergy here, or I think maybe even in decks where it's a slow meta and you're going to be, you draw that land on turn 12 and just want some gas. This is a really lean, fast deck. How often, I wonder, are you going to be pitching that Secluded Steppe, especially in white where you don't have a ton of card draw anyway? It's different maybe in mono blue if you're playing a deck where you're going to be drawing a ton of cards and you're like, I'm just going to junk it, I don't care. I don't know if this deck is one where you are oftentimes having a pile of extra cards in your hand that you want to pitch that Steppe. I feel like it will come into play tapped on turn 3 when you don't want it to come into play tapped more often than it will save you or help you out by letting you cycle to draw a card. What are your thoughts there?
I seen that this deck is too slow for stuff that we would typically recommend, like Commander Sphere
Right.
or Mind's Eye. I think it's a fine include. I think it's one of those things where if it's in your opening hand and you only have one other land, you mulligan that hand.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
It is definitely a thing you want to see turn 4 or later, not turns 1 through 3.
Right.
So it's extremely situational. I think it's fine.
Okay.
Would it be better as just another snow-covered plains? Probably, but we're in mono white in a very fast meta where you can't afford to spend an entire turn casting Mind's Eye and leaving mana up
Right.
just to hopefully draw a card. This is fine.
Okay. The one I looked and I couldn't quite determine if there was something I was missing, and that was Phyrexia's Core, which lets you sacrifice an artifact to gain a life.
It's a combo starter.
So what's the combo?
So you can sacrifice like Mirror Retriever
Okay.
and get something bounce back,
But
but that also it fills your graveyard.
so wouldn't you be better off running, since all Teshar can bring back are creatures, wouldn't you be better off with like a high market that since it sacrifices any one of your creatures, it'll also hit that Mirror Retriever, it'll also hit that Junk Diver, and if you need to sacrifice something else, you can. So I'm just wondering, is there a situation where you want to sacrifice many of these non-creature artifacts?
Okay, so 9 of his creatures, including Teshar, are non-artifact.
Yeah.
So of the 25 creatures, 16
Most
are
of them aren't
artifacts.
artifacts. I'm just wondering,
But you also have stuff like your Ichor Wellspring.
That's true.
Nobody's going to kill your Ichor Wellspring to let you draw a card in our slow meta like
Right.
our LGS, and our LGS isn't even that slow of a meta.
Right.
But like,
you're not seeing Vandal Blast probably.
you're not
in
seeing
this.
Vandal Blast. You're seeing you need to draw your gas, and if this lets you sack that Ichor Wellspring on turn 3 to draw a card,
Okay, well, that would
you
make-
do it.
I'm wondering then if that might not be a place to replace like Secluded Steppe or something with a high market just to give you one more sack outlet.
One
in a
more.
land.
Or even the only other card I could possibly think to add to this land base, and it does slow it down quite a bit in terms of the meta we're working with, would be like Mistville Plains. It does come in tapped, but you can fetch it.
Sure.
So it could be your turn 1 fetch.
Yeah.
Go
can
get
be
it,
as well.
brings in tapped, and then you drop your 0 costing mana rocks. Next turn you have 5 mana.
Sure.
But Mistville Plains lets you put stuff that, hey, someone's going to scavenger ooze that card I need. I'll Mistville Plains it to the bottom of my deck.
Okay. All right. So let's jump over here, and there's a ton of them. Well, let's go to enchantments first. That one's easy.
Because there's 2 of them.
Because there's 2. Enduring Renewal and a Land Tax. So I think most players know Land Tax. Enduring Renewal is a little bit trickier.
Most players except for Ryan Green of Commander
There we
Social.
go. Yep. Enduring Renewal, you play with your hand revealed. If you would draw a card, reveal the top card of your library instead. If it's a creature card, put it into your graveyard. Otherwise, draw a card. And whenever a creature is put into your graveyard from play, return it to your hand. So that's an interesting card that I don't think I've ever seen anybody play in a deck. So it's a combo piece here with the Teshar.
Yes.
And that's just what it is. Yeah, I don't know where else you would run it, but this is a perfect deck for it.
It definitely is. Like he said in his notes, it kicks off a combo if Teshar isn't on the field.
Yep.
It's definitely interesting. It synergizes well with the commander, and it does enough on its own where you don't need the commander.
Yep.
And in a fast meta, I don't think you care about your opponents knowing what's in your hand because you're just here to win.
Particularly in white, where you're not holding counter spells or anything.
Right.
The only sorcery, we'll do that next, is Slaughter the Strong, which is a board wipe, and that was in, was it an Ixalan? Is that what that's from?
First Ixalan set, yes.
Each player chooses any number of creatures he or she controls with total power 4 or less, then sacrifices all other creatures he or she controls. And it's only 3 mana. I had never seen this cast until Vegas, and I saw it, I think, in 3 different decks, and it was just a beating every single time.
So, I like Slaughter the Strong. I feel like the fact that they could keep potentially up to 4 creatures or more, because what if you're playing, not in this hypertune meta, but like, you choose as many creatures as you can to where all their powers equal 4.
Right.
So you could keep 4 1/1s, you could keep a bunch of somethings, you could keep 2 2/2s, or a 4/4, whatever.
Yep.
For the same amount of mana, but 1 less white pip, I kind of like Retribution of the Meek better, because it just says destroy everything with power 4 or greater.
Sure.
So it's like an Elspeth Sun's Champion -4,
Yep.
but for 2 and a white. It is kind of pricey because it is an older card. It's only been printed once.
Yep.
But I feel
think
like
it's on the reserve list even, I believe.
Maybe.
But that wasn't one of the. It's not so expensive.
It's like $15 to $20. God, I'm gonna check that because watch, it's gonna be like 50.
Yeah, you can get yelled at for suggesting that Cabal Coffers is still 35. like some dummy here did, who we won't point any fingers at myself.
It is on the reserve list, and it's only $10. All
right,
so
okay.
I was fine. My personal opinion is, I mean, granted, all the generals he named are less than 4 power.
Yep.
So maybe this does the trick better than Retribution of the Meek, because it does say bury all creatures with power 4 or greater.
Yeah.
So Vala isn't a 4 power, Urza is not 4 power. You know, maybe this is the better card. I just feel like I would rather get rid of everything.
Sure.
Versus nothing.
Yeah, I can see that. How about the instants? There's only 8 of them in this deck.
Yeah, so we have Disenchant, Dispatch, Enlightened Tutor, Generous Gift, Mana Tithe, Path to Exile, Silence, and Swords to Plowshares. I love Silence in a CEDH level deck.
Silence is such a fascinating card. It's not very good for the most part in regular EDH, and it's just a monster in CEDH level stuff.
Yeah, it either protects your turn so you can win,
Yep.
or it stops your opponent from winning.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for 1 mana, that's an amazing card. Mana Tithe in that environment too. Not that, like, occasionally I think we told a story, or we on a show that will air after this next week that we already recorded, I tell a bit of a Mana Tithe story that just happened to me recently. It can be an effective card in a regular EDH, but at this power level near CEDH or so, where people have such lean, they're operating on the margins where there's just so little room for error and so little mana left. And games generally, at least, aren't going to that point where you've got 14 mana free for turns. It's a much more effective spell than it is elsewhere. Generous Gift, just a great removal spell in general. And I mean, I don't love Disenchant in regular EDH, but again, where you're playing in the margins here, it's just an efficient removal spell at 2 mana, and there's just nothing else really in white that does the same thing. There's no white equivalent of Nature's Claim to naturalize like there is here for Disenchant.
I wish there was.
Yeah. Like I said, with this many artifacts, dude, this is a perfect deck for Dispatch. The one other spell I was wondering about here, just because I've seen it in a lot of decks at this rough power level, is Mandate of Peace. Can you cast it during combat, and opponents can't cast spells this turn, and it ends the combat step. So I guess it maybe depends on what your meta looks like in terms of how much combat damage is coming through, but I think that's a really good card for this kind of deck. And Teferi's Protection.
So I agree. Teferi's Protection would be great in this deck because it lets you, your life total can't change, all your permanents phase out, you have protection from everything. But I feel like this is the type of meta where they're not winning by combat damage
Probably
or even like
not.
a Blood Bond combo. It's, I just did this infinitely and you all lose.
Right, yeah.
So maybe Teferi's Protection doesn't really protect against those type of combos.
It doesn't maybe dodge some of the things it does in normal meta.
Right. The other one I was kind of thinking of was either Brought Back or Faith Reward, knowing that we're doing a lot of sacrificing. So Faith Reward lets you return to the battlefield all permanent cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn for 3 and a white, and it's an instant. And then Brought Back is white, and then you choose up to 2 target permanent cards in your graveyard that were put there this turn from the battlefield and return them tapped.
Yeah, Brought Back I think is pretty solid here, particularly because that 2 mana makes it's way easier to leave 2 mana up than it is to leave 4 mana up for a Faith Reward.
Yeah.
Like you're getting less things back by a large margin sometimes, but that's just a way easier thing to prepare for. Mm-hmm. So that's one I kind of like here too. The problem here isn't not so much making suggestions. I don't know what I would remove. Like there's cards I think that are good in this deck, but I don't know what to tell him to remove from any of these slots either because this, like he said, is such a tight deck.
Yeah.
So, where to next, Max? There's 2 long columns, creatures and artifacts
Let's
here.
start with creatures.
Okay.
There are 24 of them. And like I said, most of them are artifacts. So we have Arcbound Ravager, Aven Mind Sensor, Burnished Heart, Aethersworn Canonist, Foundry Inspector, Junk Diver, Knight of the White Orchid, Leonin Relic Warder, Memnite, Metalworker, Mirror Moon Vessel, Mirror Retriever, Ornithopter, Perilous Mirror, Phyrexian Walker, Ranger Captain of Eos, Recruiter of the Guard, Restoration Specialist, Salvage Scout, Scap Trawler, Scrapyard Recombiner, Thalia Heretic Cathar, Walking Ballista, and Workshop Assistant. Whew.
And a lot of those are just really, really strong cards. Any of them jump out at you that you want to talk about, either in the good or the bad? The one that I would say, man, Burnished Heart's a really, really good card, but I feel like that's like a casual card for guys like me. Is that dude?
So,
yes, you can recur it with Teshar.
yes. It's his only ramp in the deck next to land tax.
Only land ramp spell.
Yes.
Yeah.
So 3 mana to cast.
3 to use.
And 3 to use. Well, if you use your mana for that and you have a Grim Monolith up, you're fine.
Like, I like Burnished Heart, but I feel like it's... Looking at this deck, I'm like, man, that I don't know if it feels in the same class as... I feel like it doesn't belong in a deck that's running Lion's Eye Diamond. And maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe he has plenty of mana free. He gets to utilize it. I don't know. But my gut instinct is I feel like that's too casual for this deck.
Yeah.
I do like Scrapyard Recombiner a lot here. That was in Modern Horizons, a new card. It's the only thing with modular we've gotten since the original modular sets. But the important thing about Scrapyard Recombiner is you can sacrifice an artifact to search your library for a construct card, which you can reveal and put in your hand and then shuffle your library. There is a shocking amount of really, really good constructs. Whether it's... I just went over this list and I've now forgotten a few of them, but Metalworker is a construct, and Walking Ballista is a construct. Scrap Trawler, which is one of his combo engines here, is a construct.
There's so many. Isn't Hangerback a construct?
Hangerback, which is not in this deck, I don't think, but
No.
Hangerback is a construct. There's just a bunch of even just those, like choosing between Metalworker or Walking Ballista in this particular deck is probably good enough. Let alone any other options you might want to get, like Foundry Inspector, just for the cost reduction. So that's one I'm glad to see here, and I'm glad to see people playing, because I think that's a really, really good card.
I'm confused by Phyrexian Walker. It's a 0-cost artifact creature that's a 0/3. So I think it's just a sacrifice fodder.
I would assume so. Basically, it lets him cast a historic spell for nothing to bring something back. So it's,
Yeah.
it's an egg, basically.
I mean, I think Hangerback Walker might be a little better just because you could cast Hangerback Walker for 0, and it goes to the graveyard.
And
you get the cast trigger. Or you could play it for 2 and get a 1 counter on it and make a Thopter. I guess the issue is you can't bring Hangerback back with Teshar unless you just can't. It's just going to keep dying.
You although I think there's times that's useful maybe, but you also can't sack Hangerback to something like, if you're doing it that way, you can't sacrifice Hangerback to KCI or to Ashland's Altar because it doesn't stay in the field long enough to do that. But I agree. I feel like there's maybe, I don't know if I would swap it out for the Phyrexian Walker, but I do feel like Hangerback Walker is more useful in this deck than Burnished Heart. To go back to a card I mentioned previously.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
So that's one of the ones that I might put in that slot for sure. Aethersworn Canonist is just such a good card. That's one of the things with this deck is there's a lot of just really good value, disruptive creatures like Aven Mind Sensor or Aethersworn Canonist that just are a pain in everybody else's butt. And man, that's hard to deal with in this deck. You better exile it or exile from his graveyard because this is just going to keep getting looped.
Oh, yeah.
Combating this deck will be really tricky. Like dealing with all these creatures that are going to be looped in and out multiple times per turn. You better hope you opened the game without Leyline of the Void, or you could tutor up this. But even like Scavenging Ooze is a pain to deal with, but the person has to leave mana free for it.
Correct.
So that's not nothing necessarily. This slot is tricky here. This whole deck is tricky because it's so tuned. I'm having a tough time coming up with many additional recommendations or many additional things that I think I would take out.
I think I would almost rather run something like Pilgrim's Eye over either Phyrexian Walker or the one we were just, Burnished Heart, because you get the land to hand right away.
You do, yeah.
Right? Pilgrim's Eye enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic land, and put it into your hand. And it's 3 CMC, so you can recur it with Teshar.
Doesn't require the additional mana investment.
Right. And it's a 1/1 flyer.
Yeah.
If that might matter.
Sure.
Versus an 0/3 nothing.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what Phyrexian Walker gets swapped with, is like something like that.
Yeah, that could be. Anything else here before we jump over to take a look at some of these artifacts?
Let me take one final look here. We have no... he has a few creatures in his maybe board, like Fiend Hunter
and Shimmermere.
Or Shimmermere. I think Shimmermere
is really, really cool, but I don't know if having the flash option
for a mana rock isn't that great.
Because you're going to win. The goal of this deck is to win the turn you start doing your things.
Yeah.
Shimmermere is great in my Vela deck, but like a lot of times that's because I want to be able to flash it and then drop a Wormcoil Engine that no one's ready for, and this isn't that deck. You're not doing that. You're not like doing something nearly as pedestrian as swinging with Wormcoil Engines.
Right, and Fiend Hunter is just a problem solver.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, I'd rather run like Stasis Snare, which I believe...
it's tougher to deal with, tougher to remove,
It's the same mana cost, 1 white, and then it has flash and it exiles target creature and opponent controls until Stasis Snare leaves the battlefield. I don't think this deck cares about combat. I really don't.
Yeah, doesn't seem to.
So why not slot in another enchantment versus a creature that does that? Mm-hmm. Creatures are easier to get rid of. You're more adept to block with them versus risking your life total unless you're Dana. So I think Stasis Snare would be a good fit for like an answer to Fiendslayer Paladin, right?
Yeah, I think
Is
so.
that right? Or Fiend Hunter.
Fiend Hunter.
Fiendslayer Paladin is the cool knight.
Yep.
So, artifacts.
Yeah.
All 33 of them, people. So we have Aetherflux Reservoir, the Death Star itself.
Yep.
Altar of Dementia, which is the sacrifice a creature. Target player puts a number of cards into their graveyard equal to the sacrifice creature's power from the top of his or her library. Anvil of Bogarden. Each player, for 2 mana, each player skips his or her discard phase. During each player's draw phase, that player draws an additional card and then chooses and discards a card. So it's fueling his graveyard as well as maybe his opponents are getting rid of, making his opponents make choices. Ashnod's Altar, Blasting Station, Chromatic Sphere, Chromatic Star, Chrome Mox, Cloud Key, Engineered Explosives, Ever-Flowing Chalice, Grim Monolith, Grinding Station, Ichor Wellspring, Implement of Improvement. Okay, I've never heard of this card, so we're going to read it. It's a 1-mana artifact. It has an activated ability for white, sacrifice it, gain 2 life, and then when it is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. Oh, it's from the Kaladesh lineup. Each color had one.
And it's going to wind up probably a couple loops that you can do here where you just bring it back, sack it multiple times, and you can basically use it as a draw engine in this deck.
KCI is in here. Lightning Greaves, Lion's Eye Diamond, Lotus Petal, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Mesmeric Orb. I might have skipped this. Grim Monolith, Mind Stone, Mox Amber, Mox Diamond, Mox Opal, Mystic Forge, Phyrexian Altar, Ratchet Bomb, Scroll Rack, Sensei's Divining Top, Soul Ring, and Tormod's Crypt.
That's a lot of 0 and 1-drop strong mana rocks.
That's a lot of bringing
utility players.
A lot of bringing stuff back.
Yeah. Again, it's just such a tight list. I don't quite know what to do with it.
So I can start.
All right.
We're at 101 cards.
Yes.
I think Mox Amber just needs to go.
I'm guessing he doesn't always care if it taps for a mana. He's using it as a way to proc stuff for 0.
True.
But something has to go because you're at 101 cards.
So Mox Amber, there are 2 legendary creatures in this entire deck, and one is your commander.
Yep.
Right there, so it's very rare you're going to be able to hit.
Sure.
2, it's a 0-cost thing, but if this is in your opening hand, what do? Do you mulligan, or do you just keep it and hope?
Right, yeah.
This isn't like you're playing Reki, or even like Reese the Redeemed, or something where it's mana rock, mana, drop your commander, Mox Amber.
And it's just it's magically then a
mana rock.
A working mana rock, yeah.
So that's my, for sure, first cut to get it down to 100 cards even.
Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, like, the problem with this entire deck is it's just so tight that I don't know what else to really suggest to cut to. I'm guessing, like, I generally don't love Altar of Dementia because I don't like the idea of, it's a great sack outlet, but target player puts a number of cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power from the top of their library into their graveyard. There's enough people that you don't want to have their stuff going to the graveyard because there's a lot of graveyard interaction decks out there.
Right.
I'm guessing he usually mills himself with this. So that does make sense. If that isn't the case, I would much rather run something like Spawning Pit that I just don't have to worry about it. I can just sack stuff at will and put counters on there. Even if I never use them, it's a free sack outlet, and that's great. But I'm going to guess in this deck, the ability to self-mill is worth it. That's probably what you're doing most of the time versus hitting somebody else.
Yeah, I think this meta is too fast to worry about something like.
Maybe, yeah, right. I suppose
you don't have enough time to stack those counters up to make tokens.
You're not concerned about the Marin player recurring something that you throw in the library because no one's playing Marin or messing around, taking that much time to do something.
Yeah. Another, again, I know this is a 0-drop artifact that just helps the Teshar combo go off, but I don't see a place for Everflowing Chalice in this list. I don't see it being, multi-kicked for more than the 2.
Sure. I wonder if it gets cast for 0 sometimes just to trigger.
And that very well could be. I think this is where Arcane Signet should go when it comes out with the Brawl decks. It's 2 mana, right?
It'll be 2 mana.
2 mana, creates any color. So it's always creating white.
Yep.
It still triggers Teshar.
Yeah.
And I mean, Everflowing Chalice in your opening hand isn't that great either.
Well, and if you're routinely casting it for 0 just to get the proc, then again, it does nothing when it sits in place. Why not just cast Hanger back, do the same exact thing?
Yeah.
but have the option later in the game to maybe cast Hangerback for 4 if you need some bodies, sacrifice it to make 2.
The same reason Walking Ballista's in this deck.
Right, yeah. Whereas Ballista can do at least the combo, but I think the upside on Hangerback Walker is probably better than the upside on Everflowing Chalice in this deck, I'm going to guess. So, because there's so many artifacts, like sometimes you'll say, well, I want to make sure I can put stuff, and I guess on turn 1, maybe that's what helps get you that Mox Opal activation if you cast this, because it stays into play, whereas Hangerback doesn't. But I think that's just the amount of times that's the difference. It seems pretty limited. I just feel like, again, I would probably go with the Hangerback there.
Yep. Something else to consider would be Skull Clamp.
Yeah, if you're sacrificing this much stuff.
You're sacrificing this much stuff. Wow. And granted, some of these bodies are like 3/2s or 2/3s, but if you sacrifice it, who cares? The Skull Clamp was on it. Draw those cards.
Yeah.
And that's what mono white needs.
And you still have, the other, whether it's the Phyrexia's Core, or Ultra Demetria, or Phyrexian Altar, or whatever, you have ways in here to actually sacrifice stuff, even if the Skull Clamp itself doesn't do it.
Right.
Archmon Ravenger's in here, that kind of thing.
I have one more suggestion for artifacts.
Okay.
And that is Altar of the Brood. So this was I will bring it up here.
Was that in Khan's block?
It was in the Khan's block. Yes, so Altar of the Brood was from Khan's Tarkir. It's a 1-mana artifact that says whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent essentially mills 1.
Okay.
Well, if you get in that loop,
right,
on top of gaining all those Aetherflux Reservoir triggers,
yep,
you're now milling all your opponents for a card times 30.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you just essentially powered up your Death Star, and now all your opponents have 30 less cards in their library, all in 1 or 2 turns.
Yeah.
And it's 1 mana, so it's going to trigger Teshar, because it's an artifact. It's cheap to cast. I think this is a cool include, and it's an interesting way to win, even in the hyper-competitive pod that he might be playing in.
The one other card that I was, I guess I didn't really think through the exact ramifications of what it would do in this deck. Whenever I see a deck like this, I always assume there's going to be a Rings of Brighthearth in there somewhere. And I'm not even thinking of what specific things it would combo with, but I just feel like there's things in here that would combo with Rings of Brighthearth, because that's just how that card works. It combos with things, and it combos with the kind of things you see in this deck. So that's just something that...
Activated ability.
And a lot of times you just see it because it lets you just do some various kind of infinite loop things. And I don't know what those even, like I didn't dig down deep enough to see, well, it would work with this and this and this. I just tend to see it a lot of times in a deck that looks like this, and it's not here. So there's probably a reason for it.
So I guess my guess for why it's not in here is it copies activated abilities. It's 3 to cast, which is pretty high for this deck.
Yes.
And 2 to activate. So you're looking at 5 mana to copy.
Just to get that first use there.
Just to get that first use. And a lot of these activated abilities are sacrifice effects. So can you copy those if you can't sacrifice the thing again?
I don't think so.
So like Burnish Heart, 3 sacrifice, : Can you copy that search for 2 lands? I don't think you can. Please tell us if we're wrong, Internet, because we probably are.
And I think it can. I think it goes infinite with Grim Monolith and Basalt Monolith.
Yes, it does go infinite with those.
There's no Basalt in here. There's just the Grim. So maybe the 1 or 2 things that combos with theirs aren't worthwhile in here.
And it only goes infinite with Basalt, because Grim costs 4 to untap and Basalt's only 3. So you tap Basalt for the 3 mana. You use 2 of it to untap to copy. You use the 3. You use 2 of it to untap, and then you use the remaining 1 and 1 from your pool to copy it. So you're copying the untap effect.
It doesn't
And then you tap, in response to that copy, you tap, and now you have a free untap, essentially.
It doesn't gain you mana with Grim Monolith. I think it just breaks.
With Basalt, it gains you 1 every time.
Yeah, I think with Grim, you need to have something else.
You need 2 things to...
Or something attached to it or something. There's ways you can still make it work. But yeah, no, that's good. You are correct there.
Brago for the win!
There you go. All right. I am unfortunately out of things to add, in part because this deck is just so tuned.
Yeah, though I believe Matthias is from Europe. I was about to say the Europe.
From the Europes?
From the Europes. So, if you ever make it your way stateside, we'd love to play with you.
For sure.
Play this deck, see how powerful it really is, because I enjoyed playtesting it on Architect. I really did.
One thing I did do when I was looking through it, I was like, oh, Cloud Key, I should have that in my Vela deck, and I don't. So I picked up a Cloud Key.
I have one in his maybe board. Semblance
Anvil. That was the other one. I kind of saw that too, and I was wondering about that, but I'm like, okay, I have to exile an artifact.
Who cares? Get rid of an artifact land.
Yeah, I guess that's true. To reduce things by 2, so maybe I'll try that too. If I'm very happy with a Cloud Key, maybe I'll try Semblance Anvil.
Yes, for those who don't know, Semblance Anvil is 3 to cast. It says imprint. When it enters the battlefield, exile a non-land card from your hand. Okay, so you can't do the artifact land. But
yeah.
Spells you cast that share a card type with the exiled card are 2 less to cast.
So any artifact that isn't a land that I would exile just reduces my artifacts by 2.
Do you really need that Soul Ring? Because Chris would say trash card.
Sure, I mean, like, if this becomes the better Soul Ring, which it essentially does at that point.
Exactly.
For the most part. Yeah. Well, to give you an example, it's not, some of the is much faster, but like last night in a game, I cast Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge, which gives your stuff affinity, gives your creatures and planeswalkers affinity for artifacts. Mm-hmm. And it was relatively early in the game. I think I only had like 6 or 7 mana. I cast Tezzeret, and I had enough artifacts out from things I'd done previously. Then I just went Vela and Wormcoil Engine and
stop
another
right
Tezzeret.
Oh no!
So I wound up getting like 18 mana of value out of casting that Tezzeret.
Excuse me, listeners, while I go throw up.
So the mana reduction that adds up across multiple spells is ridiculously strong,
to say the least.
So yeah, that's one I will be considering in my deck as well. But I definitely already went and got the Cloud Key to try that out. So, well, Matthias, thank you very much for sharing this deck with us and for supporting us on Patreon. Sorry we couldn't dig any deeper. Your deck is just fantastically tuned as it is.
It's super tuned.
But thanks for letting us talk about it.
Yes, I actually might try. I say try building this in person because there's a lot of expensive cards in here. But it would be cool to just proxy it up and see how it actually plays.
There's definitely, like, if you're not playing in that fast of a meta, you don't need the Lion's Eye Diamond, you don't need the Mox Diamond. Like, you can build a budget version of this. It's probably pretty effective. So, yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks to all our listeners and all our supporters. We really do appreciate it. You guys help make this podcast possible week in and week out, sometimes, most times, multiple times a week. We'll be back next week with a show where we're doing some mailbag stuff.
More mailbag.
All right. Our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. Our show was edited by Ken Peddle. You can find him on Twitter at LOAD3R. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDR_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. We'll be back next week. Until then, I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.